The whole history of our society is the history of class struggle. All social achievements, victories, catastrophes, revolution, progress, and reaction, all of this was a product of the ongoing struggle between classes. Classes are large groups of people differing from each other by the place they occupy in a historically determined system of social production, by their relation, in most cases fixed and formulated in law, the means of production, by their role in the social organization of labor, and consequently, by the dimensions of the share of social wealth of which they dispose and the mode of acquiring it. Classes are groups of people, one of which can appropriate the labor of another, owing to the different places they occupy in a definite system of social economy. Mankind was not always divided into classes. In the prehistoric period, before the appearance of private property, family, and state, our ancestors lived under the primitive communal system. The work of the primitive community was collective, heavy, and unproductive, and it was only through the joint efforts of a large group that people could ensure their survival in the wild. They didn't know about the division of labor. There was no exploitation of human by human. Food, weapons, and household items, all these were common to the primitive people. However, everything changed with the development of the means of production and mental abilities of man. People learned how to extract more of a social product than was necessary for their survival. The increased surplus product inevitably fell into the hands of those who appropriated it by force. The greater the product in the hands of the primitive rich, the more dependent the other members of society became. Control over the surplus of social product allowed one person to exploit others, and from that moment, the society was divided into two unequal parts: the exploited class, producers of all material goods, and the few exploiters. This is how class antagonism arose. Over the centuries, social relations have changed, but the struggle between the antagonistic classes remains unchanged. At first, there were slaves and slaveholders, then peasants and feudal lords, and finally, the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. The state is a mechanism for suppressing the exploited masses by the ruling class. It protects private ownership of the means of production, introduces a monopoly on violence, propagates the point of view of the ruling class, presenting it as the truth. The police, the army, all of these social institutions are part of the apparatus of coercion. The bourgeois state suppresses the working people by a whole host of methods: economic coercion, dispersal of trade unions and demonstrations, and wars. The objective class interest of the proletariat is to take power into its own hands, completely eliminate the bourgeoisie as a class, destroy capitalist relations, and build socialism. Since any state is class stratified by nature, the accusations of Soviet power existing as a dictatorship are completely absurd. The state is always the dictatorship of one class over others. Soviet power only replaced the power of the exploiters to the exploited. But the class struggle of the proletariat against the bourgeoisie does not end with the formation of a socialist state. First, petty bourgeois elements still exist within society, from which at any moment a new bourgeoisie can grow up. Secondly, the rest of the world remains capitalist and tries with all its might to prevent the development of the world revolution. This is why Joseph Stalin pointed out that the class struggle in such conditions only intensifies. It has never happened, and it will not be, that the obsolete classes give up their positions voluntarily, without trying to organize resistance. It has never happened, and it will not be, that the advance of the working class towards socialism, under class society, could do so without struggle and turmoil. On the contrary, progress towards socialism cannot but lead to the resistance of the exploiting elements to this advance, and the resistance of the exploiters cannot but lead to the inevitable aggravation of the class struggle. Remembering Stalin's words, we must not lose sight of the fact that the class struggle is not one-sided. This is not the struggle of the proletariat for its power, but also the struggle of the bourgeoisie against the proletariat to maintain its dictatorship. It manifests itself literally in everything: in the destruction of social guarantees, the monetization of medicine and education, raising the retirement age, and the elimination of labor rights, in total control over the lives of citizens and debt enslavement. The purpose of such measures of the capitalist state is simple: to increase profits at the expense of the workers and to maintain its power, depriving the proletariat of the opportunity to learn, to be treated, to organize, and to oppose the bourgeoisie. All of this is a class war, and it doesn't cease to exist, even if it's presented in the bourgeois propaganda as class peace and a social partnership. The bourgeois state attaches great importance to the sphere of propaganda. The spread of bourgeois patriotism and chauvinism, the support of religion, the spread of petty bourgeois ideology in the form of a business cult, are all a small part of the methods that capital uses in its struggle against the workers. With the intensification of the crises of capitalism, class antagonism intensifies. The struggle of the proletariat and the capitalists is becoming more and more obvious. The number of employees is constantly growing and has already reached, according to some data, more than 90% of the world's population. The capitalists can do nothing with this, since the historical mission of capital is in the even greater socialization of labor. This process brings profit to the bourgeoisie, but at the same time makes workers into cohesive, organized masses, capable of fighting back. Therefore, capital has to artificially create a protective barrier between the two classes. For example, a layer of high-paid workers, the so-called labor aristocracy. After the collapse of the socialist bloc, the capitalists do not feel threatened by the labor movement. The offensive against the rights of the working people is going on all over the world, and even a layer of highly paid workers are put under the knife in the midst of a crisis. Concentration of large capital in the hands of several corporations leads to the bankruptcy of the petty bourgeoisie. Yesterday's entrepreneur is crushed by the power of large companies, who loses his business and replenishes the ranks of proletarians. Capital has created huge masses of working people, organized them for joint work, and, contrary to its will, united them against itself. The first revolutionary attack to bourgeois rule was stopped. Today we live in an era of reaction and counter-revolution. Nevertheless, capitalist production and private property has not disappeared. On the contrary, monopolization of markets continues, the number of unemployed and poor proletarians increases, financial and economic crises are increasing. A new round of class struggle is starting. Capitalism itself generates its denial, its downfall, and large-scale class encounters yet to come. The task of the workers in this situation is to use the internal contradictions of the capitalist mode of production and crush the capitalist system. The destruction of capitalism will allow humanity to move to a new, socialist type of society. There will be no division of people into classes and exploitation of human by human, where workers, and not the capitalists, will be the masters of life. But you can do this only by realizing yourself as part of a class, having mastered the most modern theory to date, hated by every capitalist, Marxism-Leninism. Only the Marxist-Leninist teaching gives a comprehensive understanding of the current situation, allows us to separate the truth from bourgeois lies, and achieve victory. Class-conscious workers, led by the militant vanguard in the form of the Communist Party, are the indestructible force capable of radically changing the situation in any country and the whole world. It happened once in 1917, it will happen again. Stay tuned.